Welcome to part 5 on my series on the Second World War. Now we're going to talk about what Churchill called the end of the beginning. Now, with the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Hitler pretty much has a blank check now to invade Poland, right? So on September 1st, 1939, he's going to do so. He's going to begin moving in. Edouard de Laddière of France and Neville Chamberlain of Britain now are going to decide, well, you know what, this is the final straw. They are going to issue a 48-hour ultimatum to Hitler. It says, if you do not get your troops out of Poland in 48 hours, it is war between us and you. Okay. Of course, the 48 hours pass. There is no withdrawal by Hitler. He has no intention of leaving. And both France and Britain will declare war on Germany. Okay. So now we have the sparking of a war. Okay. Now, the expectation was that this was going to be just like the last war. We always prepared to fight the last war, and that the lines in Poland would get bogged down and the sides would get dug in, and you would have months, years of just stalemate. But the tactics have finally caught up with the technology. Hitler and the Nazis, and specifically the Wehrmacht, Germany's army, is going to employ a technique called blitzkrieg, or lightning war, to use the literal translation. Okay, a combination of tanks and air power and paratroopers even to make the battlefront mobile again, and it works. Poland falls in just 28 days. On the 29th of September, Warsaw is going to surrender, Poland is going to surrender, and they're out of the war. Russia, matter of fact, was so amazed by how fast the Nazis were moving through Poland that they actually began their invasion of, remember, their half early to make sure that they actually got it, right? So the result is now Poland once again is wiped off the map. All right, Poland has a pretty tragic history when you take a look at it, right? What proceeds afterwards, what should probably have preceded, is an invasion of France into Western Germany, right? It's very lightly defended because most of the troops are from the east. It's not what happens. There are some French troops that do go into Western Germany for a time, but then they go back behind their defensive fortification because, again, they're fighting the last war, the Maginot Line, which is kind of like a trench system on steroids. Okay, and what proceeds over the next several months is what is often referred to, instead of blitzkrieg, we're going to call it Sitzkrieg, right? The sitting war, as the two sides just kind of stare at each other. For Hitler, this is perfect. This allows him to build up his forces. It allows him to plan ahead. Matter of fact, it even allows him in April of 1940 to invade Scandinavia and conquer both Denmark and Norway, therefore securing his iron supply from the neutral nation of Sweden, right? Finally, on the 10th of May, 1940, he's going to begin his invasion of France, right? And lightning war, blitzkrieg, again, he's going to begin cutting straight through. It's the Schlieffen plan all over again, only it's slightly reversed in that it's going to trap the French and British forces in the north of France, right? On the very first day of the battle, Paul Renaud, who is now the new prime minister of France, is going to call England and say, the battle is lost. And Neville Chamberlain, who's out of the office, he's not the one that takes the call. It's Winston Churchill. His first day on the job, this is the phone call he gets from France. He's just moved into this position, and he's been told the battle is lost. He's like, whoa, easy. He immediately flies to Paris. The situation is very dire, right? Like I said, as a result of the Blitzkrieg attack, the British Expeditionary Force and a large percentage of the French reserves get trapped in the north of France at a place called Dunkirk, right? Then a miracle happens. Between the 27th of May and the 4th of June, the majority of these troops, not the equipment, but the troops get evacuated from Dunkirk, right? That's important because though you lose the equipment, you didn't lose the men, and it's a lot harder to replace men than it is to replace equipment. So now that Hitler has secured the Western Front, and he thinks it's just a matter of time before Britain just gives up, he changes his focus to the east. Now he's ready to attack Russia. On June 22nd, 1940, Blitzkrieg goes into Russia in what's known as Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa, the idea is to do the same thing that's happened in Poland and France and Holland and Belgium, Denmark, Norway, a very quick wrapping up of Russia. And at first it looks like it's going to happen. The forces advance very quickly, and by August of 1940, some forward scouts for the German army could actually see Moscow. Right? They won't actually get there, but this is to get that Lebensraum that Hitler's promised, that living space, right? But they'd underestimated the sheer just numbers of Russia. Matter of fact, German General Franz Halder will say this of Russia. He says, "The Russian colossus has been underestimated by us. Whenever a dozen divisions are destroyed, the Russians replace them with another dozen." By the end of 1940, by December of 1940, this has drawn down into a stalemate, and the most powerful general in the Russian army will begin to exert himself. His name is General Winter. Now, December of 1940 is really the heyday for Nazi advancement in their quest to take over all of Europe, right? There's going to be some small gains they'll make here and there, but I mean, this is pretty much it. In North Africa, the Italians had initially tried to move to take over the rest of North Africa, along with what was being held by now Vichy France, a puppet government of the Nazis, and themselves, and had pressed the British back into Egypt. They needed Nazi help in the Africa Corps to do this, of course. But on December 8th, 1941, the United States is now involved in the war, right? They declare war on Japan, and on December 11th, Hitler declares war on the United States. So that means all that material is now, and people are going to start to come to bear, right? So in Africa itself, you're going to start seeing all this unravel, okay? For example, on November 8th, 1942, American forces are going to land in Morocco and Algeria in a operation called Torch in the northwestern part of Africa. At the same time, there had been a critical victory November 1st, a week prior, at a place called El Alamein, right, that is near Cairo, right? And the British began pushing westward while the American forces who had landed began pushing eastward, right? On November 10th, 1942, 2 days after the Torch landings, Churchill made a comment on what was happening there when he said, "This is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." And it was, right? At this point, we're going to start pushing back this Nazi juggernaut, right? In the case of North Africa, by March of 1943, the German and Italian forces had been pushed all the way from east and west into a small little area of the nation of Tunisia, right? Finally, on May 7th, 1943, Tunis in Tunisia will fall, and on May 12th, the head of the Africa Corps, no longer Ernst Rommel, who was in there initially, General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim will surrender to Allied forces, and that will officially end the Axis or Nazi and Axis campaign in North Africa. Stalingrad would be the Eastern Front's linchpin, right? After that first year of attacks that were stagnated by December of 1940, in the spring of 41, Hitler started a new, just southern offensive to try and get to the oil fields near the Caspian Sea, right, in the Caucasus Mountains, right? He pressed all the way to the city of Stalingrad. Stalingrad is a major transportation hub on the Volga River. You have to have this city to control these oil fields, all right? Okay, so on July 17th, 1942, the Wehrmacht is going to enter the city in an offensive dubbed Operation Blue. The 6th Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, is going to actually command the forces in there, and they're going to press the Russians into a thin strip right up against the Volga River. But at this point, Stalin will issue his famous Order Number 227, which is the not one step back order, and they are going to slowly take back control of the city, led by General Vasily Chuikov, right? At the same time, he was fighting street to street, house to house in this absolute urban warfare. Another army led by Soviet General Georgy Zhukov is going to start an offensive in November 19th, 1942, that's going to literally isolate the German Sixth Army inside of Stalingrad. The result of this is that every day the lines move further and further away from Stalingrad. The Nazis have gone as far as they're ever going to go. Every day, General Paulus is asking Hitler if he can try and break out. And every day Hitler says, fight to the last man, right? Until finally, Paulus, who has recently been promoted to the rank of Field Marshal, and Hitler saying on January 30th, 1943, no German Field Marshal has ever surrendered in the history of Germany. And Field Marshal Paulus said, well, you know, there's a first time for everything, right? He said, I have no intention of shooting myself for this Bohemian corporal. And on February 2nd, 1943, Paulus and the Sixth Army and his 91,000 men who were left will surrender to the Russians. Only 5% will survive captivity. Churchill will call for a continuation of the offensive against Italy and against, you know, bouncing out from Africa into Italy and what he referred to as the soft underbelly of Europe. The Americans really wanted to do an invasion of France, but Churchill is going to press for this southern offensive in order to, you know, because he says that a French invasion at this point in time would have been a disaster, and he's probably right, right? So what will follow the occupation or the conquest of North Africa is going to be an invasion of Sicily in July of 1943. We'll conquer the island of Sicily, and then finally in September of 1943, we're going to land in Italy and begin working up slowly up the boot of Italy. So slow, in fact, that Rome will not fall until June 4th, 1944, news that will be overshadowed by the following day, the Normandy invasion in northern France. All right, just to kind of wrap up Italy, Mussolini will find himself, because of this southern invasion, very much embattled and in deep, deep trouble. In fact, Mussolini's going to get fired, right? His fascist party on July 24th, 1943, during the invasion of Sicily, is actually going to call a meeting of the Fascist Grand Council in which they are going to overwhelmingly pass a resolution to dismiss Mussolini from power. Now, he is going to go to work the following day on the 25th of July saying, hey, I'm a dictator. You have no authority to do this. He shows up to work and he gets arrested. He's thrown into, well, not jail, really, a remote mountain hotel called the Gran Sasso d'Italia, which they thought, well, the Nazis won't be able to rescue him from there. It's too remote. Well, they do. They'll send paratroopers into the Abruzzi Mountains there where the hotel is at, and on September 12, 1943, they'll rescue him and put him in charge of a rump state of Italy that now is being occupied by the Germans, right? But like I said, for Mussolini, his days are numbered. Matter of fact, by April of 1945, when the war was about to end, he tried to flee Italy by disguising himself as a German foot soldier and getting on a transport. Mussolini's so recognizable, this didn't work at all. On the 28th of April of 1945, he was actually drugged into the plaza there in Milan, the Piazza Loretta, by his own people, and shot and strung up and placed on display, along with his girlfriend, Claretta Petacci, right? There's a lesson in this here. Never be the girlfriend of a dictator. It doesn't end well, right? Mussolini's wife survived the war. Just saying.